And we are recording.
Terrific. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your patience. We had a little technical challenge on my end, and they've gotten me straightened out, so here we are. Take breath. So at this point in time, I would normally be picking up the carefully placed microphone that Andy and John had put on the podium. I'd be moving to the middle of the stage in the James Dunn Theater, and I'd be calling you all together, trying to talk you away from your bear claw and your cinnamon roll and your half-drinking cup of coffee, and encourage you to come in and join us. But we're going to go ahead and get started anyway. Good morning. It is my privilege to welcome you to the Fall 2020 Convocation. It occurred to me that this is my 31st convocation as a college president, and I could have never imagined celebrating the opening of a new academic year in this manner. Then again, there's a lot we could have never imagined when we celebrated the opening of spring semester last January. The COVID-19 pandemic continues to rage across our country. Nationwide, 5.47 million people have been contracted the virus, with the death toll exceeding 171,000. Here in California, 635,000 people have contracted the virus, and the death toll has reached 11,335. Here in Marin County, as in other Bay Area counties, the virus continues to be very much present. By all reputable accounts, it appears we are in this for the long haul. I hope you and your loved ones are being safe and staying healthy. By now, we all know or know of someone who has contracted the virus, and there are growing numbers of us who have lost a friend or a loved one to it. I would be remiss in not taking the opportunity to thank each of you once again for your hard work and dedication to our students and community since we went remote on March 23rd. March 23rd, nearly 5 months ago. Each of you played and continue to play an integral role in ensuring the college remained operational so that our students could continue to receive quality instruction and support, so that along the way, with their own determination and resilience, they were able to fulfill their educational goals. Despite the pandemic, this past spring, 435 students earned 493 associate's degrees, 168 certificates of achievement, and hundreds of other students completed the requirements to transfer. Good-looking group of students. I applaud each of you as together we applaud our students. We're going to change up the order of our program this morning to accommodate our esteemed speaker, Lasana Hotep. Here's a quick look at the agenda. As is customary, we always begin our program by welcoming the new members to our learning community. It is now my pleasure to introduce all of our new employees. I sure wish we could see their faces today, but I'm going to go ahead and read the list of new employees. Lauren Amundsen, Laboratory Tech and Biology. Juliet Blank, Student Accessibility Services Counselor. Wendy Bulkey, Dental Assisting Instructor. Shauna Callahan, Human Resources Tech 2. Mari Daniker, Senior Payroll Specialist. Brandon Drake, Community Education and Services Program Specialist. Emily Fox, Microbiology Instructor. Henry Herrera, Custodian. Shelley Smith, Dental Assisting Instructor. Alina Verona, Dean of Workforce Development and Career Education. That was our list of new full-time employees. We also have a number of people joining us in the part-time rank of the faculty. Jody Branham in Nursing, Tyler Graves in Music, Ryan Ham, Fire Technology EMT, Doug Morton, Music, Eric Munoz, Counseling, Aviva Rossi, Biology, Philip Tran, Business, and Robert Wilson, Fire Tech and EMT. Please join me in welcoming all of our new employees to the college. Now, customary, I normally challenge each of you to ensure that none of our new employees leave the convocation without a date, a coffee date or tea date. So those of you working with these individuals, I'll encourage you to take up that order and to ensure that we welcome these folks to our college community. It is now my honor and privilege to introduce the Marin Community College District's Board of Trustees. I'd like to give a shout out to Diana Conti, Suzanne Crow, Bill Cranenberg, Eva Long, Stephanie O'Brien, Stuart Tannenberg, and Wandine Trainer. Thank you, trustees, for the service you provide the college and community, and for standing resolutely against systemic racism on our campuses, for aspiring to make COM a thought leader on equity, taking the issue on full bore, encouraging us to look at things from a human capacity point of view, asking for next steps that assure accountability, asking how our students are doing, understanding that the student's perspective is exactly what we need as this conversation progresses, and acknowledging that this is just the beginning. Those were the actual spoken words of our trustees at a recent meeting of the board. So, board, congratulations and thank you for your continued service. The recent murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Douglas Lewis, and Ahmaud Arbery became a tipping point across the country toward a long overdue movement for true racial justice, especially for Black and African American people. On July 27th, in alignment with the Chancellor's call to implement anti-racist practices with the goal of improving accountability and outcomes for anti-racism and equity, I announced the adoption of a 9-point plan to fulfill our mission of providing equitable opportunities and fostering success for all members of our diverse community and accomplishing the equity goals outlined in our educational master plan. That message was recently resent to you, or will be resent to you at 9:15 this morning. I have it on a timed resend, redistribution, for those of you perhaps that have been away off the grid since summer. The plan's third point addresses ongoing anti-racist training for the Board of Trustees, the Superintendent President, the Cabinet, and employees. Let's see, check, 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 check. We're all here, and I think we're ready to roll. We are very fortunate today to have with us a highly regarded educator and guest speaker. Lasana Hotep is an anti-racist, anti-sexist educator, writer, and equity advancing executive coach. He has given impactful presentations all over the United States and abroad, in Beijing, China, in Accra, Ghana, on issues of educational equity, anti-racism, anti-Blackness in institutions, and campus climate. Lasana serves as the Director of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging at the University of California, Berkeley. He has contributed to 7 books, his latest being the co-author of Minding the Obligation Gap in Community Colleges and Beyond, Theory and Practice in Achieving Educational Equity. In addition to his roles as director and author, Lasana functions as a consultant to academic organizations, community-based organizations, and corporations, using his engaging multimedia-based presentations to provide insight charting a way forward for hundreds of institutions throughout the nation. And we can now add the College of Marin to that list. Please join me in welcoming Lasana Hotep.
Good morning, Dr. Coon. Thank you very much for that warm introduction. I'm really excited to be a part of the Marin College community today as we embark on this very unorthodox fall 2020 semester. I'm really honored to be invited to the community. Went on the internet and saw that y'all customarily have welcoming events like this. And so I wanted to add a little picture to kind of set the tone of how things used to be. But things are quite very different. And in the time that I have with you all this morning, I want to take some time to address how we can work collectively as an organization to lean into the changes that we have. And as it was spoken earlier so eloquently by Dr. Coon, that we're facing a pandemic, not just a pandemic in the form of COVID-19, which is a public health crisis, but also another pandemic in terms of racism. Now, racism isn't something that's new in this country, but with the murder of George Floyd, it has brought the issue of extrajudicial killings and overall the value and quality and exploitation of Black life to the fore in a way that it hadn't been brought forth in some time. And so as you can see from the cover of the New Yorker magazine from June 22nd, 2020, this wonderful painting done by Kadir Nelson depicts George Floyd and his body. And his body represents not just the incident that took his life, but an entire historical legacy of disenfranchisement, of dehumanization, and extrajudicial killings of people of African ancestry housed in his body. And this particular rendition represents where we are as a nation in terms of this conversation of being able to now reconcile and deal with the narratives and the histories that are necessary for us to move forward. And one of the reasons why the state chancellor called on anti-racism to be adopted and engaged by our community college system is because students are now coming forward and being crystal clear that they are tired of the lip service that has been given to issues of race and issues of disproportionate impact and issues that have impacted particular communities that have gone vulnerable far too long. And so now what we find ourselves is in this situation where we're in this era where this umbrella term of equity is being used. And equity is being used as a synonym for diversity. Equity is now being used as a synonym for anti-racism. It's equity this, equity that. And my responsibility when I work with our colleagues in education is to provide some baseline understandings for these terms that we're using and provide some kind of context, because in some cases, everything is everything, but in other contexts, everything isn't everything. And so my responsibility when I have an opportunity to work with my colleagues and to engage them is to genuinely try to say, hey, what are we really talking about here? When we start on this journey to have this conversation about equity within our organizations, when we start this journey to start talking about cultural identity in our organizations, when we begin to have these types of engagements around anti-racism, what are we really talking about? And it's very important that we are clear on what we're talking about to one another, right? And to also other communities so that we're clear on what we're actually trying to achieve. And so what I hope to do today, before we even start talking about cultural and racial identity, is getting us to come to terms with some basic understandings on why we are even engaging in this conversation around race as educators in the very first place. And so as a participant in the opening day for the College of Marin, I'm honored. I'm truly honored to be able to have the opportunity to kind of lay down this foundational work and engage in what we call the 4 core competencies. And when we talk about these core competencies, what I argue is that we have to have a general understanding at minimum of what these competencies are before we can actually engage in a conversation about identity. And so the first thing we have to deal with is this paradigm shift. In the olden days, a day like this, would be followed by the opening day of classes, where a president of a college or a dean of students would gather everybody in the auditorium and they would say something like this. They would say, look to your left and look to your right. One of you will not be here at graduation. And some of us remember those days. And some of us remember being in those auditoriums. And some of us were actually speakers who said those types of things. Some instructors still to this day still use that model to kind of weed out some students and say, hey, this class is not an easy A. I only give out 2 A's a year, and we say these types of things. But these things were meant to express something. They were meant to express that college isn't for everyone. They were meant to express that we have a particular level of rigor at this institution, that everyone's not going to make it. And that was the model that all of our institutions from Harvard all the way till today were based off of, this particular model. But we're no longer in that era. We have been asked to pivot. We've been asked to rethink our work. And now we are in what we call the student success era or the completion agenda era, where now we're looking at course completion. We're looking at persistence and retention. We're looking at graduation and degree attainment. We're looking at transfer. And so there has been a fundamental shift in our work. We used to be institutions that operated under the right to fail model, but now we're in the era of the completion agenda. These are 2 totally different ways of approaching education. The types of motivations and the types of questions that we ask have to be reconsidered. Because in the right to fail model, we put a lot of our energy on getting to the 45th class day, right? Because the 45th class day was census day. And that was the day in which we got our understanding based on the information we submitted to the state chancellor's office, our allocation, right? And so in the right to fail model, be it as it may, after the 46th day, if you make it, you make it, you don't, you don't. But we're no longer in that era. But the challenge that we're facing within our organization is that we have not asked everyone in the organization, every single member in the organization, to have a meeting and say, what does my job look like under the completion agenda? Because every other job to this point has been under the right to fail model, our organizational charts, our funding models, our student support services, the way in which we engage pedagogically and through andragogy have all been under the right to fail model, that education isn't compulsory after the age of 16. And if you go to post-secondary education, it's a volunteer basis, and either you make it or you don't. But we're not being held accountable to that standard anymore. And we have not really engaged our organizations around that first question. The second thing we have to deal with within this context that we're in a new era and there's been a paradigm shift is we really used to focus on how do we make college-ready students. And so the onus was on primarily three groups: the families that the students came from, the P-12 system that brought the students to our campuses, and the student themselves. And that's where we really did a lot of the interrogation. But we're no longer in that era. We're in an era where now we have to ask a different question. How does my college become a student-ready college? That's a different question. That's a different approach. That's a different set of considerations and assumptions. And so when you look at the authors who wrote Becoming a Student-Ready College, they really challenge us as educators. They say a student-ready college, at student-ready colleges, all services and activities, from admissions to the business office to the classroom, even campus security, are intentionally progressive advancement, intentionally designed to facilitate students' progressive advancement towards college completion, but also to organizational learning and institutional improvement. So understanding we've gone from right to fail to student success is our first understanding. The next thing is understanding that now we have to become student ready. We have to find out, what does that mean? What does that really mean for the College of Marin to become student ready, right? These are types of questions that we have to grapple with before we even talk about the issue of race and identity, or equality and equity. And speaking of equality and equity, many of us may be familiar with this experience in our personal lives. We'll go to a public event and people want to go use the restroom and relieve their bladders. But then you have this phenomenon where for one group that's in this picture labeled ladies, it's a very long line. And the one that's labeled men, there's no line at all. Matter of fact, the guy's just sauntering out, putting the shades on. He's really comfortable. What I want you all to understand is that this is what equality looks like. This is equal. One men, one ladies. But even under this equal model, you're getting disproportionately impacted groups. You're getting disparate outcomes. But before we even interrogate this particular model, right, let's think about how we deal with this within our student populations. We'll see that equality is producing this. And instead of saying, well, clearly, as we can see here, that it's structural, right, that is by the design itself, it's not the people who are using the restroom, we say, well, we need to study these people. And if we take the way in which we approach our student groups who are disproportionately impacted by our institutions and use this model, what I call potty parity, what happens, we'll say, we need to find out why it's taking women so long to use the restroom. What is wrong with them? And we need to do studies. Somebody needs to write master's theses. Somebody needs to write doctoral dissertations. We need to have conferences on this. And then we need to find women who can use the restroom real fast and bring them to these summits and these symposiums and have them shame the other women and say, hey, Crystal can use the restroom real fast. Why can't you? Keisha can use the restroom real fast. Why can't you? Maria can use the restroom real fast. Why can't you? And then we start student clubs and learning communities, and we get them polos and give them pizza and give them direct counselors, right, on this group who can use the restroom real fast. And then we look at the rest of them and say, why can't you all do it? Now, as absurd as that sounds, that's what we're doing with our students. We're looking at something that by equality, the structure is producing disproportionate impact, even though it's equal, like here. When we really need to have something that either looks like this to deal with the disparate impact, or something may look like this, where we also have non-gender conforming restrooms. This is where the tension is within our organizations. This is the rub. As soon as the group categorized as women say we need more restrooms because equality is not producing the outcomes that we need, we are having to suffer unnecessarily. The group that's labeled men who aren't disproportionately impacted, who don't have a hard time going to the restroom, who have no lines, will say, that's not fair. If you give them another one, you got to give us another one, even if you don't what? Need another one. This is why we can't have equity within our organizations, because we think equity is equality, and we don't realize that equity has to do with social justice and healing and remedying challenges that have been structural and institutional. And so this is where our organizations have fallen short. It's because as soon as we have this very difficult conversation, say we need to leverage these human and fiscal resources to remedy this disparity, the people who are not disproportionately impacted are going to say it's not fair, and they're going to fight to either one, get another restroom, two, which they don't need, or fight like hell to make sure that the other group doesn't get the support that they need under the notion of fairness. And a lot of leaders do this. Well, I can't do this for this group because if I do it for you all, I got to do it for another group. I can't have a support for this particular population because if I support this particular population, even though the data shows that they need support, because then I have to do it for everybody. And this is where our organizations are falling short. So we have to understand baseline definitions. Equality is good. Equality in education is achieved when students are all treated the same and have access to similar resources. Yes, everyone should have access to the library. Everyone should have access to the tutoring center. Everyone should have access to good instruction. But equity is achieved when all students receive the resources that they need so that they graduate prepared for success. And the way in which we understand that students aren't graduating with their need is when we look at our student success data. And our student success data shouldn't just be findings that we can speak to and use fancy vocabulary words like disproportionately impacted or underrepresented minority and all these other vocabulary words. It's the studies and the findings are supposed to direct our dollars and direct our human resources to close the gap. Because I'm gonna tell you right now, 0.2 release time, 0.4 release time from somebody from that particular cultural community and giving them pizza and polos might at best stop the gap from widening, but it's not gonna close the gap because the gap wasn't created by 0.4 release time and 0.2 release time employees. The next thing we have to understand is how we are to be transformative within our organizations. Our organizations tend to be very traditional. And the traditional approach lacks a systemic analysis of education and fails to take into consideration race, bias, and social historical factors when we're doing this work. While transformative produces innovative, student-ready, anti-racist, anti-sexist consciousness and practices for success. Well, that's where we get into this conversation about identity. How do we create anti-racist, anti-sexist, student-ready, transformative experiences? Well, in order to do that, we have to really understand what we're dealing with in terms of race. Right now, we think race is about being offensive or being offended. We don't understand what it really is. And so for us to really, truly have an informed and impactful and a transformative conversation around identity, because we want to be student ready and we want to respond to the disproportionately impacted groups because we're now student success organizations, not right to fail organizations. We have to have these competencies, but it becomes very difficult because what happened is that we are adults and we're very cerebral and we've come up with these sophisticated rationales on why we either do or don't do certain things. And we hook it on the principle or we hook it on our value. If they wouldn't have done this, I wouldn't have done that. If they would have done this, we would have done that. And that translates in our classrooms and on our campuses, but also in society. We see an egregious act, an act of inhumanity happen. And the first thing we say is, well, if they weren't doing such and such and such and such, or if they would have listened to so-and-so and so-and-so, then that wouldn't have happened. So what I want to do with our community of over 300 gathered this morning is I want all 300 plus of us to look at this experience. And we're going to watch an experience where 3 different people are doing the exact same thing at the exact same location. And let's see if that's how we really operate as communities, on principle and value alone and not on who's doing the thing.
You see this and you wonder, did he lose his keys or is he blatantly stealing that bike? In broad daylight, he hammers and then saws on the chain. When that doesn't work, he pulls out an industrial-sized bolt cutter. And when he's asked, he fesses up.
You lost the lock?
No, not exactly.
But he's not a real thief. Justin Kelly is an actor, and our hidden cameras are rolling.
What happened? Nothing. I can't get through the lock. I mean, I know it's weird, but you wouldn't happen to know whose bike this is. Would you? Oh. All right, good. Thank you.
It was odd that somebody had all that equipment.
But you didn't do anything.
No?
That's true.
That's the bottom line.
Lots of people stop and stare. A few even question the actor.
I guess I have to ask, is that your bike?
I guess technically no.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Good luck.
In over an hour, about 100 people pass by. Only George and Arlene try to stop him. Some tell us they plan to call the police later. Others say they're scared. Keep moving. This woman and her friends give our thief the benefit of the doubt. When we ask why, Visa Washington tells us first impressions matter.
I remember thinking young white men don't usually carry burglar tools.
So we all make assumptions, huh?
Yeah.
I'm thinking maybe he works for the park.
We replace our white thief with this young man, Matlock. Remember, both actors dress in a similar way and are about the same age.
Is that your bike?
Nah.
Then what do you cut the chain for?
Right away. Right away, somebody yelled. Wow. Within seconds, another person confronts our thief.
Is that your bike?
Technically, it's not, but it's gonna be mine.
More people converge.
Is that on the cell phone? You call the police. He's like stealing somebody's bike.
Are you taking that bike? That's your bike?
No, it's not, sir.
Oh, why are you doing that?
Is this any of y'all bikes? Is this your bike?
It's not. It belongs.
No, but whoever's it is.
belongs to someone.
To who?
Well, not to you.
And sure enough, one man whips out a cell phone to call 911.
Yeah, there's someone taking a bike here.
Our actor triggers more reaction. Some people are even snapping pictures for evidence.
I got you.
I got you.
Guys, stealing the bike. Whose bike's over here?
Once everyone moves away, we reset our cameras. And within minutes, another outraged man is yelling.
Are you trying to steal that bike?
Excuse me, sir, but the bike's been here for days. Like, no one's gonna take it.
Well, that's not your bike then.
Yeah.
You can't just come in and take something from somebody.
Excuse me, sir. I'm
Okay, I'll just take your tools away then. You sure, sir?
Please, sir, don't touch my stuff, sir. Please, sir, do not touch my
Well,
stuff.
you're touching
Please.
somebody else's stuff.
Yeah, all right, but this has been here. Like, who's gonna take it?
Well, that doesn't make it your property.
Technically, it does.
No, it doesn't technically. It's not yours to take.
All right, sir.
When we bring out our cameras, David Robb wants us to go after the thief.
That kid in the red shirt is hacking away at a bike that's not his. And he has a right to take it and steal it. And it's come here.
She may not look like your average bike thief, but actress Ashley Carpenter makes sure anyone who asks knows she's up to no good.
Need a hand?
You don't know who this is, do you?
Whose bike it is?
Yeah.
With a little help from Ed Fitzsimmons, the bike chain easily falls away.
Oh my goodness, what a strong man you are.
And he isn't the only man who stops in his tracks. What's this guy thinking?
You know, you pull up, you don't know if she lost her key, if she's trying to actually take the bike, but then again, she's a girl. And would you ever see a girl doing that?
Steal?
You never know. Most of the time, it's a guy going to do something like that.
Reginald pedals right past his appalled wife, straight to our actress, asking her if she needs a hand.
Okay, I'll eventually get it.
I did some time in roller. I can steal it.
Oh, you can steal it? You can help me steal it.
And so the reason why I showed that video when I have these conversations is because of a variety of reasons, but for the sake of time, I'm just going to cover two. One, if the community really valued or didn't value bike stealing, they would have treated everybody the exact same. They either were indifferent about it, like with the first man, or with the second young man, they would have been doing community policing, or like with the young lady, they would have become accomplices in the theft. But obviously you can see that who was doing the thing impacted the response. Now, the interesting thing about it is that the response that happened to the second young man, no one used any slurs, no one used any pejoratives, no one even identified him as being black. They said the guy in the red shirt. And one of the reasons why it's very difficult to have these conversations about race is because we're like, well, I don't see color. I just see people. And I don't use those type of terms, and I never use those type of terms, so I'm not one of those types of people. But he clearly got treated differently. Another thing I want to address is that if those three young people were not actors and had ice cream together afterwards and were to talk about their experience about stealing bikes in that park, once it got to the young man with the red shirt, he would have told his story, and his other colleagues would have been like, man, that's not how it goes down. I was stealing that bike and people didn't even care. The young lady would say, I was stealing the bike and people were helping me. What is wrong with you? Why are you trying to say that race has something to do with it? This is what happens within our organizations. People of color are being treated differently. We come to tell our colleagues, and our colleagues think about either our experience with that person, or our experience with that department, or our experience with that particular phenomenon, and we blame them. What is wrong with you? When clearly he got treated differently. But because those two, when they were stealing the bike in that area, they didn't get treated the way he treated, so they became dismissive of his narrative and dismissive of his experience. This was one of the reasons why we have a challenge around race and identity. This is the reason why George Floyd's murder struck a particular chord. See, is because all of this dismissiveness that we've been doing, right, has finally caught up to us. Because what we've been trying to do is not really interrogate the narratives, not really question our assumptions. We've been trying to slap some equity on top of it. And this is what it looks like. This is an illustration of what we've been doing, right? This is a horrible paint job. Wouldn't pass a snuff on any HGTV show. I don't care who's the host. No priming, no getting rid of the undercoat. But this is what our equity work looks like. Let's keep all of the narratives that have been, let's keep all of the stereotypes and biases that we've been rooted in as a society, and let's slap some equity on it. And this is one of the barriers to what we're trying to do to become more anti-racist. So how do we deal with this? We have to become racially literate. And what is racial literacy? Sonia Douglas Horford at Columbia University says, racial literacy is understanding what race is, how it works, and its relationship to inequality, and in our case, inequity. If you're having a conversation about race and haven't even begun to talk about what it is and how it works, you're not having the conversation you need to be having. You're not doing the work you need to be doing. Just looking at data showing disproportionate groups and not getting an understanding on why those groups are disproportionately impacted and what systemic and institutional structures have contributed to that, we're not doing the work that we're supposed to be doing. Because we have to understand that in our great state of California, there's been a great demographic shift, not just in numbers over the years, but also in populations. As you can see, the Latinx population have gone from 1970 to 12% all the way to 39%. And when you look at America, the United States of America as a whole, or even the globe, and look at our state of California, we're one of the most diverse places on the planet Earth. 27% of Californians are foreign born. 39% are Latinx, 38% are white, 14% are Asian American, 6% are African American, 3% are multiracial, and 1% are either First Nation or Pacific Islanders. And so this is the kind of competencies, this is the kind of understanding we need to know, because also Latinx and African American students tend to start their collegiate journey at two-year institutions higher than their counterparts. And so these are the populations that we're serving. So if we're going to be student ready, if we're going to be equity minded, if we're going to embrace the understand that we're student success institutions and we're learning institutions, we have to have a different set of skills. We can't do it with what we have. But we have consistently been able to overlook these things because of this colorblind approach. Colorblind racism is the new racial music most people dance to. The new racism is subtle, institutionalized, and seemingly non-racial. This comes from Racism Without Races by Dr. Eduardo Bonilla Silva. He's the chair of sociology at Duke University. And I love the title of this book because this book is addressing this issue head on. We have all of this racism that exists on the planet, but no one is a racist except for that small group that are avowed people. But everyone else no one's a racist. It's kind of like people, when I go and I drive and I see a sign at McDonald's that says over 60 billion served, but no one really admits that they eat at McDonald's. I'm like, who are these 60 billion if no one's eating at McDonald's? Where is this racism coming from if no one's racist? Dr. Bonilla Silva argues most whites believe that if blacks and other groups would just stop thinking about the past, work hard, and complain less, particularly about racial discrimination, then Americans of all hues could quote unquote get along. Think about in any other context where that happens, where that's how you solve the problem. If people would just stop talking about traffic accidents wouldn't happen. The reason why they're happening is because people are talking about them. If people would stop talking about toothaches, and then toothaches wouldn't happen, right? The fact that people are bringing it to the fore is not the problem. The reason why it's being brought to the fore because it is a challenge. He continues in the book, he said, whereas Jim Crow racism explained black social standing as a result of biological or moral inferiority, colorblind racism rationalizes people of color's contemporary status as a product of market dynamics, naturally occurring phenomena, or blacks' imputed cultural limitations. And so in the past, you would have things like eugenics, these pseudoscientists and scientific experiments like phrenology and things of that nature that would give the rationale. But that's no longer politically correct. So now people come up with other rationalizations. But what you have to understand is these are consistent rationalizations and narratives to give a justification for either the neglect of particular communities or the exploitation of these communities. Now, what we find is that a lot of people go into this whole conversation and they begin to organize their organizations around trainings around implicit bias. And there is value in implicit bias trainings. But as we can see, when Miss Cooper was walking her dog in Central Park and came across Mr. Cooper, what are the odds they would have the same last name, an African-American man who was a bird watcher, who asked her to put her dog on a leash. And at that point, she commenced to choking the dog to have the dog make a shrieking sound while she called 911 and say that an African-American man was intimidating her. I'm not sure how implicit the bias is. And so although there is value in implicit bias, there is value in examining microaggressions, Jane Elliott really has done a lot of work to show us that our biases may not be as implicit as we think they are.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
And so Jane Elliott brings it crystal clear that we know that there's a difference. And in this difference, as I begin to summarize and wrap up my talk, in this difference, we understand that we have gotten to diversity and inclusion. And diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism are great. It celebrates difference. It gets us to recognize different types of people and different types of communities. And it gets to bring various voices and stories to the fore. But that is not enough to end what we see in forms of exploitation. But what happens is we've gotten stuck on this diversity, inclusion, and multiculturalism, right? Thinking that it's just about being a nice person and just being a good person. But our colleague Robin DiAngelo really challenges on this notion about our niceness and its connection to really ending this scourge of racism that we are experiencing as a nation.
Into the status quo. For so many white people, we think that the answer to racism is friendliness. If you notice the evidence that most white people will give for why they're not racist, one of their top pieces of evidence is, I know people of color. I have friends of color. And so if we apply that question, you know, if we look at that evidence as a way to understand the deeper structure of meaning, right, it's actually quite revealing. So in order for a claim like that, I know people of color, I have friends of color, in order for a claim like that to be good evidence of my lack of racism, a racist can't be able to do that. Otherwise, it's not good evidence, right? This is what distinguishes me from a racist. I have people of color in my life. I live in New York City. I was in Teach for America. I went to a diverse school. These are all the claims that white people will make for their lack of racism. Well, that must mean a racist cannot live in New York City, could not know or speak to or be friendly to people of color, could not be in the Peace Corps, etc. And I'm hoping you can see right now how ridiculous that evidence is, because even an avowed racist can do all of those things. So most white people believe that niceness is all it takes. And the status quo of our society is the reproduction of racial inequality. That's what it does. It's a default of all of our institutions, our norms, and our policies. It's what our society does. It's what it's always done. Our outcomes are not improving. By many measures, our outcomes of racial disparity are increasing, right? And all this system needs to keep on keeping on reproducing racial inequality with whites benefiting from it is for white people just to be really nice. Be really nice. Go ahead. Smile at your coworkers of color, go to lunch on occasion, and do nothing else. And you will uphold that system, because niceness is not courageous. Niceness is not anti-racism. Niceness will not get racism on the table, and it will not keep it on the table when everyone wants it off the table. I suppose it's better than not being nice. But it takes strategic, intentional anti-racist action. It is a lifelong process that I will never be finished from.
And so Robin has challenged us to be anti-racist as I begin to bring this to a close. What are we talking about when we say anti-racist? I always put anti-racist with anti-sexist because that is the frameworks that I teach from. We recognize, those who are anti-racist, anti-sexist, that these are systems of exploitation. So let me kind of give you a small example before I move on. If we think racial animus exists because people from various cultural groups don't get along because they don't spend enough time together, they don't know each other's stories, they aren't in proximity, and what we need to do is come together more and spend more time together and watch different television shows with different groups of people, right? And that's why racial animus exists, and we just really need to be closer. Then why does sexism exist? Does sexism exist because men aren't in proximity to women? That don't know women's stories? That we don't know our mothers, our aunts, our partners, our colleagues? No, it's not about proximity. It's about exploitation. Narratives have been created to dehumanize and devalue populations to rationalize why you exploit them. So we are just off of the 100th anniversary of women having the right to vote. It wasn't that just women couldn't engage in a franchise. Women were being exploited that entire time where they could not vote on the legislators who are making laws for 100% of the population, nor have a voice in the allocation of all the tax dollars that were going to impact 100% of the population while they couldn't vote. There was an extraction and an exploitation taking place while they were being told that they were too nice and too sweet and too soft to engage in politics. And the same thing with these other cultural communities. When these narratives have been created, exploitation was taking place. Transactions were taking place with them being left out. Dollars were being allocated. Communities were being built while these other groups of people were being left out. And now we look at the effect now and treat the effect like it's the cause. So what do? Do we go into become astrophysicists, theoretical physicists? No. The reason why I put Albert Einstein up here is because he has a wonderful quote about how we engage this. He says, "No problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it." This is one of the biggest problems we're having within our organizations. Issues of race, issues of culture and identity come up, and what we do is we go to what we've been doing. We say, well, let's just give more money to what we've been doing, or let's start a task force. Let's get a group of people and create a task force to deal with this. But what has happened to that group of people? Has that group of people gone through a process so they can actually come out with different results? Or are they bringing all the things that they had, like that previous room that I showed you painted before? So what kind of solutions could we expect from them, right? And not only do I use Albert Einstein because he's a ubiquitous figure in world history, but most people do not know that Albert Einstein was an anti-racist and worked actively in Princeton, New Jersey against racism. This is him teaching at a historically black college called Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. Now, as wide known as Albert Einstein is, most people do not know that he taught at a HBCU in his free time. Because that's the kind of society we have, that something can be so ubiquitous, but yet we do not know the details of the lives of these great people. But I'm a pragmatic optimist. I'm very optimistic because in this COVID era, what we realize is that people who had long-standing resistance to online instruction got on board in a matter of weeks. We were able to provide student services online when we couldn't even, at that point, even imagine having to provide those services, financial aid, admissions and records, and otherwise. We went through an arduous process of procuring and distributing technology to our students who are most vulnerable and didn't have the technology. And even today, we are reimagining our trainings. We have reimagined our meetings and even our opening day at this moment. So I know that we have the capacity. I know that we have the ingenuity. My question is, do we have our imaginations broad enough for us to take all of this innovation, all of this ability to adapt, all of this ability to be very radical when it came to taking our services from face-to-face to inline, and have that same type of commitment, that same type of capacity, that same type of investment in human and fiscal resources to transform our institutions along lines of race, identity, and culture. I thank you very much for your time and attention.
Lasana, thank you very much. I wish you could hear the thunderous applause that was so deserving of. We greatly appreciate it. And I got to tell you, I can't think of a better way to tee up the work that's ahead of us this year, the important work that's ahead of us. And I sure wish members of our college community had the opportunity to engage with you directly, which is how we would normally do it. But in the third hour, actually, we're going to have the opportunity for folks to break out and to discuss the work that you presented to us. So I'm so appreciative, and I can see now why you're such a hot speaker on the market right now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, President.
All the best to you.
And I appreciate you all. Have a great opening day.
Okay, wow. So you will recall that I was very pleased to announce earlier this summer that we have aligned with the California Community College Equity Leadership Alliance, facilitated by the University of Southern California Race and Equity Center. While this alliance will take our equity and anti-racism work to a new level, it will build on the impressive work already underway here at the college. I am proud of the work of the Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Action IDEA Committee since its inception in 2017. Earlier this summer, IDEA introduced Community of Practice, Reflecting on Race and Anti-Racism, as a series of facilitated discussions, which will continue throughout the academic year. I am proud of the work of Psychological Services, who in collaboration with Umoja brought us Dr. Kevin Coakley's presentation, The Psychological Impact of Racism and Imposter Phenomenon on Mental Health, and later Amade Nibokun's presentation, Black Mental Health, Access to Care and Collective Healing During COVID-19. I am proud of our Equal Employment Opportunity Committee, who developed our EEO plan and who's helped to reshape our hiring processes and practices. I am proud of the EOPS's program's 50-year history of supporting low-income, first-generation, and students of color. And of course, I'm proud of the village that the Umoja program has created in support of Black and African-American students, graduating a record number of students this past spring. In 2018, we celebrated the Puente program's 10th anniversary, and I am proud of the quality, culturally relevant experiences that have been provided to over 300 Latinx students in the past 12 years. Clearly, I could go on and on singing the praises of our learning communities and such initiatives as Hum 101, MAPS, and STEM that provide much needed support for our students. You know, for the first time in the college's nearly 100-year history, our educational master plan calls us to real and meaningful action as it relates to equity. Specifically, our educational master plan calls us to action into eliminating existing racial equity gaps, hiring, supporting, and retaining equity-minded employees, reflective of the diversity of our student body, and becoming a leader in promoting the equity throughout the county. But in order to fulfill our mission, and to fully accomplish these goals, we must first address the historic and structural racism that exists in our institutions of learning, including right here at the College of Marin. As I stated in my July 27th message, growth and transformation towards a truly anti-racist college and society requires a shared commitment, transparency, intentionality, integrity, and most importantly, individual and collective accountability. This will not be easy work, but we have reached the right time in our history to accomplish it. Speaking personally, as I have before, about becoming an anti-racist, I have always considered myself a work in progress, and now more than ever. As a child living in the South during the early 1960s, I became aware of my race and racism at a very early age. The way in which I observed Black and African American people being treated by members of my own extended family and others will forever be imprinted in my mind. Throughout most of my adult life, I have worked to reconcile how these early experiences as a white person have informed my view of the world, my own implicit biases, and how I treated others, and ultimately, and most importantly, how I show up today for others, in particular, Black and non-Black people of color. I've been fortunate throughout my 30+ years in higher education to have had extensive professional learning opportunities in diversity, equity, and social justice. While I consider myself to be well-informed, a white ally, and on that journey toward greater racial enlightenment, I accept that anti-racist work starts with me individually and is ongoing. And I call each of you to join me in this important work. This has truly never been more important than now. We're going to move to our college updates with inviting a couple of our vice presidents to provide some information on what's going on. But before I ask Vice President Eldridge to provide an update on the status of fall instruction and student services, I want to address the development of our safe reopening plan. Our safe reopening plan sets forth how the college will provide in-person or face-to-face instruction, even on a limited socially distanced basis. This has been a major undertaking that began several months ago by a task force that I appointed. The task force was originally envisioned to do the initial heavy lifting by creating a framework for a plan from which we could build out with the appropriate input from faculty, staff, and others. The task force relied on the guidance from the county and state agencies, as well as other model plans to inform the development of the plan. But as always, you know, we're a learning community, and so there's always lessons learned. It's become clear that each reopening plan must be very specific to the needs and nuances of the institution. And in our particular case, specific to the needs and nuances of our programs, disciplines, and courses. I believe we got most of the general framework right early on. However, with the semester upon us, it is clear we haven't quite gotten to the level of detail needed. In retrospect, I believe we fell short in some areas, in our engagement with faculty in particular, engagement which was timely and consistent. That said, I am pleased to report that we are working very closely with UPM to resolve a variety of outstanding issues that pertain to health and safety. And I'm confident that we're on the right path to getting that done, and we're going to get it right. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who's contributed to the development of the safe reopening plan, those on the task force, those of you who reviewed it and provided feedback, and those of you who critiqued both the plan and the process. And most importantly, I have to say this, toward the greater good, I'm confident that everyone who's been involved in this process has had the health and safety of our students and employees as their #1 priority. So with that, I'm going to hand off to Vice President John Eldridge to give us an update on student learning and success for fall semester.
Thank you, President Coon. And it's great to be here with everyone today. It is very different to be here virtually rather than in person. I think this is the first time where I've had a convocation or an opening of an academic year that has not been about the human contact, interacting with people, the conversations, getting to see people, catch up. And I know that's difficult for all of us. And speaking of difficult for all of us, I know that we've also been through a lot of learning in terms of how to use technology. And if some of you are like me, earlier this week, my 7-year-old daughter, after learning how to bake a cake for her dog on an online class, explained to me several features of Zoom that after all these months, I didn't even know existed. And it made me realize that back in the day, I might have been the one teaching my parents or grandparents how to program a VCR, but now I'm on the other end of that equation. And that made me feel a little older than I'd like to feel. So I went and did the dishes for the 6th time that day and got over it. But as much as we've been disrupted in so many ways since last March, one thing has come clear. And yesterday, Barbara Benander in the academic department chair and coordinator meeting made a comment. And she said, I understand enrollment's looking really good. That must mean we did something right through all of this. And I thought, yeah, that is the case. And our enrollment is looking really good. As of yesterday, we're up about 1% in headcount enrollment from last year at this time, despite the fact that we're offering about 8% fewer sections overall. Now, some of that's by design, particularly in career education, where we're reinventing a couple of programs. But it's also because some courses we recognized we might need to hold back on given our unique circumstances and how they would translate to online instruction. But even though we're offering fewer sections, our enrollment's up by 1%. And the really interesting and I think positive thing that we can take from all of this, particularly given all of the hard work that so many folks around the institution have done over the last few years to help more students achieve their educational goals, to reach graduation, to do so more quickly so that they can maintain their aid eligibility as they move on to their 4-year institutions, is that our FTES, or full-time equivalency, which means basically translates to the amount of units students are taking, is up by about 6%. So while we're offering fewer sections, we have more students on campus and those students are taking more units. And I think that wouldn't be happening if it weren't for the hard work of all of the faculty and staff, everyone here today, who this last spring picked up their world in turmoil and within a week figured out how to transition to online instruction, and then throughout the rest of spring term, make that an incredibly resilient process. I shared earlier this summer results of both a faculty and student survey about the transition to online instruction. And overwhelmingly, students indicated that they had positive experiences with that, but a majority also said they experienced some unevenness, while some things worked well in some areas, in other areas not so much. Faculty similarly were the case, and by and large, our students prefer face-to-face instruction, as do our faculty, which is understandable. That's the way we were built. But I think given this transition, what we also heard very clearly through those surveys was that students really appreciated the fact that faculty were responsive to their needs, worked to pivot along the way, to find new ways to accommodate them and to be flexible. And so I want to give a sincere thanks to everyone for all of that hard work that I think led us to the point today where we are, unlike many other institutions in the state, struggling with enrollment. We're at a point where our enrollment is looking strong. But our enrollment overall is made up of individuals. And just the other day, I saw in the New York Times that one of our recent alums who just graduated and transferred to UC Davis, Eric Tobar, was featured. And he was featured in a piece about how this is the most diverse class ever to enter the University of California system. And I thought about Eric and all of the other students that we work with on a daily basis, all of the support and resources, all of the educational opportunities. And I think about how proud I am that we were able to help Eric, who came to us from Guatemala about 6 years ago after his father was killed, to join his mother, who had to work 2 jobs through high school and through his time with us as she became unable to work. And I think about our partnership with 10,000 Degrees that also assisted him. And I think about how great all of that is. But I also think, in the context of Dr. Hotep's remarks, I wonder, when and how did I make it more difficult for someone like Eric? And how and when did all of us make it harder for others, by policy, by practice, by omission, or by accident? And I think that's where we need to focus this term as we continue to hone our skills on how we deliver online instruction. We also need to focus our attention on reviewing our programs, updating our curriculum, and doing things like today, seeking professional development. And these aren't things that we need to focus on occasionally, but really things we need to focus on perpetually. And I think we all know that. That's why we built in systems with program review, which is reviewing the program, not reviewing the students, to really think about, are we doing the things we need to not do harm, and at the same time to ensure that those students who traditionally have not had the same opportunities by the nature of the structure of education, both at the K-12 system and beyond, deserve. So with that as context, I also want to just offer a few thanks. I want to thank all of the faculty who are teaching this fall for taking time in the summer to go through the online teaching workshop, to all of the faculty who acted as mentors in that process, to all of the staff who worked incredibly hard over the summer remotely to meet student needs, to answer questions, to ensure that they have their basic needs met. The staff who even this week are on campus making sure students get the laptops, the hotspots, the cards to get them extra food at the grocery store so they can focus. All of those things that are happening. I want to offer my sincere thanks to that. And a particular thanks, I think we all want to thank Kathleen Smith, Stacy Lentz, Carrie Torres, the folks who were the backbone behind helping us continue to try to improve what we're doing and end up here today. So with all of that, I'm going to end just by saying that as we look ahead to this semester, I know one of the things that I miss incredibly is the actual interaction with each of you. And yesterday during that chair's meeting, it was sort of an open discussion, question and answer. And at one point, I asked if folks had questions, and Jessica Park said, "I don't really have questions. I'm just enjoying being here in the presence of others." So I hope that we can all find ways, as remotely as it will be, to enjoy the presence of each other, and to really remember that in the end, it isn't Zoom, it isn't Canvas, those aren't the things that are the most meaningful. They're the things that facilitate the meaning, and the meaning being the time, the attention, and the focus we place on our students, on their needs, and on us, and what it is that we need to learn to help do better by them. So with that, I just want to thank everyone for your commitment to this place and to our students. And if, as always, there's anything I can do at any point, I'll be right here in this location, ready to help in any way I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate, well stated all around. At this time, I'd like to ask Vice President Nelson, Greg Nelson, to provide us with two reports. The first report will focus on the budget, which fortunately have some somewhat good news to share there, which is great. And then the next one he'll do is then on facilities. So take it away, Greg.
Thank you, Dr. Coon. Good morning, everybody. Glad to see folks. Wish I could see you in person, as John mentioned. And I know you don't miss me yelling at you trying to get into the theater by 9 o'clock to make sure we start on time. So I've got a couple of presentations I want to show you today. One is about the budget. And let me see where I can see. Sorry. Hopefully everybody can see my Convocation presentation. So I want to start with the budget and give you some highlights around state of California, the region, Bay Area region, and in Marin County, then down to the college level. And some of you may have or may have not followed a lot of the information related to COVID and the impact it's had on the economy, finances, state and local governments, et cetera. But it's certainly an unprecedented time how fast the impact was to our economy and to our budgets going forward. Usually we see kind of a trickle effect. And I wanted to, first of all, before we get into that, I wanted to say thank you to all the fiscal services staff, all the PRAC members, for all the hard work we've been doing to make sure the budget stays balanced and make sure we have the resources we need for all the planning, and also too for the debt and stuff we have with the college and so forth. It's been a real pleasure. And I'll be honest with you, we're in a lot better shape than most colleges around us. And there's a lot to be said for that too. So I'll start out, give you a little bit of the state budget for the governor. This is kind of the natural budget process from the state. And you can see down here the allocations. There are now 73 districts in the state. The state just recently added a new district. So now we have 73 districts across the state of California. How it impacts us, and what I'll do is go through this a little more and kind of the stair-step format I mentioned before to help you understand, hopefully, where we're coming from overall. So this just gives you an idea of kind of the labor force, and you'll see the month over charge from May to June and year over year changes. And you'll see there's total civilian employment and civilian labor force is really down and unemployment's up. And so that, naturally drives concerns from the housing market to the rental market to income tax, property tax, et cetera, and how people can pay for these things. One thing I will mention is unemployment has really affected, probably 2/3 of the unemployment has affected the lower third of wage earners in the state of California. So you have a lot of lower end wage earners that have been affected by this, hourly workers, part-time workers, et cetera, that has been really impacted going forward. The unemployment rate hit its peak in May of this year at 16.4%. We're down to 14.9 as of the last data available in June. That's about, actually, the raw data shows it's right at 15%, a little over 15% right now. It's not bouncing back like they thought, but it is bouncing back some. You look year over year, though, from June to June from last year, it's a 10.9% increase. That's a staggering number for unemployment as the impacts of COVID took place and businesses started closing. You'll see that, and this is just the same reflection in the number of jobs as it reflects across the state. So 17 million in June of last year, 15.6 now. Just to reiterate the same numbers in a different format. So the state budget process, how the governor in May, he does the May revise. He also gives his governor's recommendation for the new fiscal year. The problem was that the federal government, due to COVID, extended the tax deadline to July 15th from April 16th, which I was happy with. But at the same time, the state of California did not have the ability to estimate taxes appropriately like they normally would for the new fiscal year. So they had to do a lot of assumptions as the budget was being built. What the governor proposed was based on revenue projections, based on us not getting any bailout money, those type of things. And the Assembly, from the Senate and the Assembly itself, actually rejected many of the things that he proposed. And that goes back to when most of y'all heard about, categorical programs being cut, a lot of the funding formula being cut, et cetera, for colleges. So with them disapproving that, they finally got to a tentative budget proposal based on a contingency that there would be $14 billion in bailout money coming from the federal government. So they extended the timeline for the adopted budget with those assumptions built in from when normally we have to have our budget approved by August. They've now extended it to October. We plan to take our budget to the September board. And then how do we handle bailout funds? Do we get a partial bailout, a full bailout, no bailout? Is some of those funds from COVID related from FEMA going to roll to the state and down to us, or is the state going to withhold a lot of that money to help balance the budget? There's a lot to be unknown at this point. Just to give you an idea of what the state budget shortfall looks like. This graph is in billions of dollars. So you see the 2001 recession, which some of us remember, the Great Recession, obviously, and then also to the COVID-19 impacts and how it's looking forward going forward. You'll see in 2021, that's the current fiscal year we're in now, looking at a $290 billion shortfall. And so that's, it's an exorbitant amount of money when you look at the total impacts from income tax, sales tax, and property tax, which in my memory, I can't, and in my research, I can't find another recession period that had all three components all being impacted simultaneously this fast. Usually you have income tax or sales tax gets pinged and it causes a ripple effect in the economy. But having all three of them pretty much shut down at one time had a drastic impact on the state of California. The state reserves for California, before this year started, we had about a $17.9 billion reserve. And so, excuse me, you can see how we have a budget gap comparatively speaking to the other dot-com bust, early 80s, oil shock, et cetera. And so the state's really struggling, honestly, with how they're going to find these extra dollars without a bailout. And so there'll be more coming. They give you some more graphics around what's going on in the economy. You'll see a change in adults' dining habits. This has got to do with restaurants and so forth. Look at March 1 of 2020, and you'll see 80% of people kept about the same amount of activity going on. March 15th, 2020, this is right about our spring break time period, it dropped to 35%. In other words, 63% less people were going out to eat. And that's still the same with all the shutdowns of the restaurants and so forth. Now it's kind of a chore to find certain restaurants you like that actually have outdoor dining. If you're willing to go out, they're far and few between. But what's happened nationally? You know, we've heard people going bankrupt, people closing businesses, people downsizing, et cetera. And what I wanted to do is, so I went through and found an article in Forbes, all the national, and some of these are local businesses as well that were national chains. They have closed locations or filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy since March of 2020. That's 5 months ago. And see if you recognize any of these. These are massive amounts of businesses that are going out of business, reducing costs, reducing store hours, et cetera, or just going out of business. Denny's, Marin County doesn't have a Denny's anymore, but Denny's is, and Cheesecake Factory just recently, last week, said they're filing for bankruptcy and they're going to be closing a lot of stores, about half of their stores nationwide. Cheesecake Factory is in Corte Madera, and it's very popular because it's the only restaurant open until midnight. But you look at some of these other GNC, Gold's Gym, some of these name brands have been around for, you know, a long, long time. And when you look at some of these names and logos, it really brings it kind of to the center of what's going on with the economy and the tax base, employment, et cetera, going forward. I know I'm personally sad to see California Pizza Kitchen close. So, well, as we move on, some of these articles I wanted to pull to show you from the Chronicle, you can't literally do both. Bay Area mothers, and I would say mothers and fathers, are choosing kids over career. I personally understand this. With four children being in school at one time, 3 of them being in high school, trying to homeschool essentially or help them with their schooling and trying to work from home, and everybody's on the same Wi-Fi system. It doesn't really work very well. So a lot of people are starting to quit jobs and actually stay home so they can tend to their children. Tech hiring slumps in the Bay Area. You'll see people are spreading out of San Francisco. The rents are dropping in San Francisco. There's a lot more empty spaces in the city for rental market because a lot of folks are just allowing people to work from home now, and they've been successful with it. And so they're downsizing their footprints for the amount of square footage they're taking up in the city instead of having big headquarter offices. People like Google and Salesforce and some of those other big companies are actually letting employees work from home right now through the end of the summer of 2021. San Francisco Institutional, I can't remember what the SC stands for, apologize, 5,000 San Francisco area businesses have closed since the pandemic began. That's the local Bay Area. So I just showed you a number of logos. That's nationally, and I will say that it does not reflect everybody. That's just what I can put on one page. But 5,000 local businesses, these are mom and pop shops, local restaurants, local hardware stores, you name it, boutique shops, paper stores, specialty items, those type of things. They have all closed. And that's drastic impact to the state economy in one of the biggest areas in the country. To kind of show you a historical impact from the county standpoint, look at the unemployment rates historically. The kind of the dark red circles are recession periods. And so you can see the increase from the early 90s to 2000s, 2008. And then currently, look at I see one on screen, hold on, sorry. You'll see the recession and the impact of unemployment as it relates to COVID. And you see just a drastic jump in unemployment rates for the Marin County. Marin County still has one of the lower rates for the area and for the state. It's below the state average, but it's still a huge impact considering how the county is so small in population. That's a big impact for the county. So what about the finances and impacts from COVID? So really we started planning for a projection-based recession in 1819. With Prax's help and so forth, we started doing it. If you remember, we did a 3-year plan going forward. We implemented that plan starting last fall, this time last year. You may remember the presentation I did and so forth then. So, and then in March, when COVID hit, we kind of had to reassess a few things, and we said we have to freeze all positions because we don't know what's going to happen. You know, initially we thought, oh, this is going to last 4 or 5, 6 weeks. And like Dr. Coon mentioned, now we're 5 months in. We built our budget proposal for the tentative budget off the governor's proposal, the tentative budget. So you'll see a lot of differences between the tentative budget and the adopted budget for us going forward. As our numbers finalized, we got more projections, we got our allocations for certain programs, et cetera. That's tentative also based on what the state does. So we've been able to provide ourselves a little bit of a soft landing. If you go back, and I'm just resharing some things I've shared in the past, but you look at the partisan investments that we've made for pension liability, that's been that's helping us along the way because we earn better interest because it's based on the stock market. We've done it. The state put a 2-year freeze for STRS and PERS in place so that rates don't increase over the next 2 years. So that's a significant increase savings for us right now. The freezing of positions, as I mentioned. Also, going to multi-year agreements. When I first started here at Marin, we were in perpetual negotiations all the time. And so having 3-year agreements gives us a better planning document for us to look at the budget going forward for 2-3 years out versus having 1 year at a time, and there's just unpredictability of negotiations. We also, at the same time of COVID impacting us, we settled on a 1-year agreement with the faculty. We kind of gave the faculty a gloom and doom type speech, if you will, not knowing what was going to happen. And obviously we'll revisit that in the next round of negotiations for the next agreement. And then conservative projection and planning. The district's been very good about projecting things that are going to happen, being conservative with our projections. And I'd much rather come in a little under what our projections are than be over projected and have to sit down with the board of trustees and talk a different length and talk a different issue around cutting money. We've also invested in solar panels, which has helped us with other things, newer, more efficient buildings. So where does that leave us overall? Well, let's be thankful we're a basic aid district. I can't express this enough. This is just a simple little graphic about how it works. If you don't understand basic aid, even though we're basic aid, we're still bound by the same regulations, the same laws, same reporting as all other colleges. It's just we get our funding a little differently. We get our a nominal state aid program, you get state aid, and then your local property taxes makes up the difference. You start off your local property taxes, and the state makes up the difference. However, basic aid funding, because our local property taxes are so high, the state doesn't have to kick in any money. The only money they kick in is for categorical programs, and schools keep the excess property taxes that we earn. I will say that little cup on the right side is a $39 million cup. It's not a small amount of money. When you look at our budget overall, it's about 50% of our budget comes in excess of what the state would give us for the college our size. So just keep it in perspective. We have resources other districts don't have, and we have had for a number of years that keep us moving in the right direction. How does that look overall when it comes to our reserves? One of the things we've done really well on is doing the reserves. 15, 16, we did not have a reserve mandate in board policy. That process started in 2017, where I've circled it in red. And these are the historical reserve numbers with the 2017 benchmark for the reserve going forward. So you'll see this year, it's really close. 10.8% is what we're going to finish with. And we have to have it for this fiscal year. And 10% is our mandatory minimum for 2020, the 2020 fiscal year, 2020, 2021, I should say. And then you'll see the out year projections. Those are projections based on what the reserve mandate calls for. And so we've been pretty frugal going forward, but at the same time, that percentage is represented in just flat one-time money. So I don't want people to think it's an ongoing, we get it every year. We save those funds. That's basically our rainy day account for the district. So where does that leave us? We have a good foundation for this fiscal year going forward. We have to be conservative going out years beyond that because we still don't know what's going to happen to us from the state. There are 9 basic aid districts currently. It has grown. 7 years ago when I first started here, it was 3. Now we're up to 9 districts total. And the state's starting to pay attention to basic aid districts now. Used to, when it was just 2 or 3, 4 districts, they didn't really pay us a whole lot of attention. Now that they're getting to be more and more districts on basic aid, legislators are starting to write in trailer language into the budget documents that we have to take in a proportional impact for categoricals and other things. And that allows us to say, okay, but in the past, we've been able to absorb those cuts with our local property taxes. But if they mandate the cut in legislative language, it becomes a different issue. And so now the 9 basic aid districts have joined together, kind of a little consortium between the CEOs and the CBOs to make sure we all stay on the same page and we're all singing the same sheet of music as it relates to policy and fiscal impacts to the basic aid districts. We still need to be prudent. I mean, we have a little soft landing for this year, but as I've said before, I project this year, next year, the outer years are soft and squishy. I don't know what's going to happen. I didn't know we're going to have a pandemic. Now we're in wildfire season coming up already, especially in the North Bay, Sonoma County. It's already affecting Sonoma County earlier than it has before. So there's always going to be something that comes up, it seems like, and it seems to be growing every year of the number of issues we have to face as a college. For those of you who are numbers people and like to look at numbers, feast your eyes on the budget. This is a draft document, obviously. That's why I put the footnote on it. This won't be approved by the Board of Trustees until the September meeting, and it's subject to be changed a little bit, but this is kind of our working draft that we think we're going to need for the out years and so forth. So there's always the October surprise, and that's kind of how it's going to land this year with the budget. If the governor and the assembly come out with surprises and we don't get a bailout and the impacts it may have on basic aid, we could be looking at a different budget document going forward. And so I just want to make sure I put that caveat in there. While we are doing okay right now, we kind of have a soft landing for this current fiscal year we're starting. there's a lot to be unknown here in the next 2 months about what's going to take place. And then also, too, the impacts of the national election on finances for the federal government and to the state as well. What do we need to be planning for going out in future years? We do have a STRS and PERS freeze in place. However, you freeze it, at some point you got to pay it. And so whether they're not going to implement all those increases at one time or extend them out, we don't know yet. That affects Cal STRS and Cal PERS. The reduced bailout, as I mentioned, other COVID-related expenditures that we don't know about yet. If, I'm hoping it doesn't happen this way, but say, for instance, we have to do it through spring semester. These are just examples of we may have other expenses that come up as related to COVID-19 that we have to face. And also to the Cal OES reimbursement. We're up about $600,000 in FEMA reimbursement that we have not received. And so I have to plan as if I'm not going to receive those funds and what happens if we do. FEMA gives the money to the state of California, and then the state of California gives it down to the individual agencies and districts. But we don't know what that's going to look like yet. Debt service on some of our bond funds, which are escalating because they're the way the interest rates and so forth worked out. And this is primarily for bonds that preceded us doing Measure C in 2004. And then also to new building operations. When we open new buildings, make sure we have the resources we need and so forth to open those new buildings appropriately. So just trust me, we'll get there. And so we'll get there through this process. We're going to be looking at some things with PRAC, going through some processes over the fall semester. And I'm assured, and I'm pretty optimistic. We've gotten this far. We can go a little further, and we'll make it. So everything's going to be okay. So just don't sweat and panic going forward. So that's my budget presentation, and I'm going to swing into my facilities presentation, which is on the heels of this one, and leave you a little bit of a positive note. So during the COVID-19 pandemic process, we really tried to escalate some of the projects we've been doing since there's been nobody on campus. And so some of you may have seen these projects in process and so forth, and some of you may have not. And we have a couple little shows we're going to show you as well. So this is Mewaxon Aquatic Center. This is kind of a drone shot looking down. That's the loop road on the back, the top of your picture. And you can see I highlighted the dive tower pool on the right side. That's where the dive tower pool is going. And you can see in this picture, they're actually excavating the dirt out for the Olympic size pool. You'll notice also the structure itself is done, and they're starting to work inside a little bit now. All the block and roofing is on the building. Just a couple of different angles and how that's going to work. This is going the opposite direction, looking back toward the quad. To give you a point of reference, the building in your top left is building 17, and the building to your top right, that's the old Child Care Center, building 12. And then directly in front of that building, at this angle, is a new building, the Dale Jonas Center, which we'll talk about in a second. So what we got here for you is a little show, and I've got a couple of these, and I hope you enjoy it. About 2 minutes. about that. So that's the Miwok complex that is slated to open for business, essentially normal operations this time next year for the beginning of fall of 21. So the next one is the Bill and Adele Jonas Center. I took these are interior shots. We mimicked the roof after a lot of the buildings that are in the current, the old architecture's components of the IVC buildings. You'll see the glulam beams and the kind of the slatted roof. When you actually see it in person, see the whole thing, it makes the entire room. It's very inviting. This is the roof over the 300-seat banquet facility, and it'll seat around I think it's around 450 or 500. It'll seat for a lecture. So my hope is at some point we can hold an in-person convocation at this building as well. And so this is just kind of a side view during construction. We're about probably about 3 to 4 weeks out from finishing construction. They're tidying up some things, but to give you a different standpoint, Miwok kind of gave you a different angle on the camera where the camera feed runs. This one kind of gives you an overhead shot so you can actually see the drastic improvements to this complex. And so hope you enjoy. So the Jonas Center will be open here not before too long. And if you ever get a chance to go by IVC, you can just drive by on the main road, go down to the parking lot, and you can see it it's right across the creek. It's very easy to see. New M&O complex also opened this summer. And so I know the M&O team is very excited about this new facility and what it brings. So these are just a few pictures for the M&O complex. And one thing I will mention is, and I didn't get a chance to put a picture in, but the old trailers next to the old M&O shop have been torn down. They're no longer there. And so we'll be repaving that to add parking to that area in due time. The only thing left standing is the old metal building, which we're currently using for the campus bookstore. And so you'll see some of the improvements. The bottom right picture is a drive going into the M&O complex. To give you a point of reference, the M&O complex sits on the old softball field, which is behind the baseball complex. This will be the drive down the side of the PE complex. It'll be in conjunction with the Kenfield School District. We're timing how we do deliveries and so forth, so we don't interrupt their school day. The picture on the left is something we desperately needed for a while, which is receiving, and it's a district warehouse to be able to store things. Before, if you ever saw the receiving shop, it was about 6 or 7 bays is all we had for receiving. And now we have a receiving shop and warehouse that we can stock supplies and so forth for paper goods, things that need to be received and shipped to the departments within the college, etc. We've also removed the trash containers from behind student services. I know some of y'all who have offices overlooking that, they'll probably be happy to hear that. We've gone to a trash compactor, so now instead of charging for us to be picking up trash bins, we're paying based on weight, so we'll be saving some money there as well. And then lastly, we have a cardboard baler installed in the new M&O complex as well, so we can recycle all the cardboard that we use. And we get a lot of cardboard from boxes and so forth. Fussman Hall. This is the roof of Fussman Hall on the top right as they were working on it. One of the important features we wanted to make sure of is we maintained the architectural ceiling in the building. So we did all the appropriate abatement work and et cetera. And you'll see on the bottom left, that's the roof line with the library installed. Library is fully installed now. And the new lighting structures and so forth for the building. This will be the home for the library until the new LRC complex has been completed. Here's the outside of Fussman Hall. It looks completely different what it used to look like, especially if you watched it during construction. Some of the trees had to come out. As you can see, we replaced all the landscaping. The ADA ramp had to meet new code. We just put the ADA ramp in on this end of the building that you're seeing back in 2015, but because we did a full retrofit of the building, the code had changed. We had to rip all that out, and you'll see we have a much more gentler, kinder slope for anybody who has mobile access issues getting into the facility. So that project is done, and I'm glad to see it finished because it's the oldest building we have left in the district. If you haven't been over to 941 Sir Francis Drake, that's college operations and home of Reaper Graphics. This is the main floor for Reaper Graphics shop. This is where all your copies are being made now, posters, signage, etc. And I know the team there is very happy. All the graphic designers and all of the Reaper Graphics staff are all housed in the same location. With the downstairs being for storage for costumes and so forth for the drama department. And then also paper goods are downstairs. The third floor of the building is actually housing that we currently lease out to public tenants for the housing market. Performing arts, we did a AV retrofit, and thanks to a donor, we supplemented on top of that. We were able to put in a state-of-the-art AV system in the building over the summer. Picture on the right is all the wiring that had to be put in for the light booth. So you can imagine the amount of spools of wire that had to be put in to get through the whole building. We've put a sizable increase in resources into that structure, and it was long overdue between railings, new lighting, new wiring, and now the new AV controls, etc. And so now they have a projector that actually retracts out of the ceiling, which is a lot better quality than what we used to use by putting an old projector on the table going forward. Other projects I just want to mention from our M&O staff. They're hard to take pictures of because obviously they're clear, but these are the new guards that we put in place for in-person contact with staff. And so you'll see these sprinkled out through the entire campus. I would just like to mention to the M&O staff, thank you. All these were built and made by hand in the M&O shop. It saved a significant amount of resources when you actually walk around and see how many there actually are. and they did a really good job in getting them installed in such a short time period. So with that, I want to finish up with one last video. And so for those in Kentfield, if you've been watching, I'm in the academic center currently, but the building next door is gone, the former LRC building. So this is a demo of a video showing the demolition. Whoops, sorry. Well, just kicked myself out. Showing the demolition process for LRC up to, I think, in the last week. Oops. So welcome back. One last thing I'll mention on the LRC is we do have an agreement in place now with the Federated Indians of Grant and Renteria for a travel agreement. And we already have found some artifacts for that site, digging it out. Right now, they're actually removing the slab for the building. So that video is a little bit behind from where they are now, but Silverado is slated to be done before the end of September with all demo, having the slab completely removed and getting it prepped for us to start planning and moving utilities, et cetera, for the newer facility later on. So welcome back to the fall semester. Thank you for giving me your time, and I'll turn it back over to Dr. Coon.
Thank you, Greg. Those time-lapsed recordings are amazing. And for those of you that were around when we brought the Austin Science Center down, it seemed like this building just came down so much quicker and so much easier. I'm not sure why that was. I've got a number of acknowledgements and thank yous to make, but I want to first ask Beth Patel, if on behalf of the Professional Learning Committee, you have any announcements to make?
Hi, everybody. I would just like to say a huge thank you to all of our presenters from this week for our Flex presentations. We've had just an incredible array, and I have to say I'm so impressed with the number of people that have showed up for them. A lot of the topics have really resonated with faculty and staff, and I think people have enjoyed getting back together. So we have 2 more days, so I hope to see you on for those next couple of days. Special thanks to the PLC, to Kara Kreit for taking over last year while I was out, and for all their hard work on getting things set up for this. Thank you very much.
Welcome back, and our thanks to you, Beth, Kara, and the Professional Learning Committee, and all of our Flex presenters this week. So before I close it out with other acknowledgements and thank yous, I want to ask Sadika, are you going, Sadika T, to talk about what's happening in the opportunity in the 3rd hour?
Yes, hello everyone. So after convocation in about 15 minutes, we will all be gathering to debrief the conversation and Lasana Hotep's wonderful presentation. We invite you all to join us. Please know that we will be breaking out into affinity groups by race, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in our introduction of that time. But the purpose of the space is for us to talk further about how we will be looking at institutional racism, white supremacy, how can we unlearn, dismantle it, and have conversations about implementation in the classrooms as well as at the college. So we hope you come and join us.
Thank you, Sadika. And I want to say a special thanks to Sadika and Dr. Yashika Crawford for actually helping us line up Lasana Hotep today. Thank you both very much. Greatly appreciate that. So some other acknowledgements. I want to thank the VPs for their presentations. Special thanks to UPM and Dr. Kelly in particular for helping us see the flaws in our safe reopening plan, and I'm confident that our work together will lead to where we need to be with that safe reopening plan. So thank you very much. And finally, to our interpreters, we say thank you very much for always, it's always good to be with you. And to all of us, I say, although we are in certainly surreal, I continue to use the word surreal circumstances as we begin a new semester and a new academic year, that we've got a lot to look forward to this year. It's different, yes, but we've got some great initiatives, some important work ahead of us. And I look forward to be right there along with you and doing this great work on behalf of our students and community. So thank you all. Have a great semester, and I hope to see you around the rest of the week. Thank you.